It's Father Vogel. Welcome back to our series on St. Jean-Baptiste de La Salle's Meditations in Time of Retreat. We are now reached the 11th meditation on the obligation of the brothers of the Christian schools to reprove and correct the faults committed by those whom they are charged to instruct. So, these 3 points in this 11th meditation are going to be that teachers have the obligation to reprove and correct the conduct and the faults of their children and students. So the first point, one of the characteristics and one of the effects of the zeal persons have for the well-being and salvation of souls is to reprove and correct those in their care when they fall into some fault. This is how Jesus Christ often made his zeal for the Jews manifest in the temple, when he went there and drove out those who were buying and selling the things needed for the sacrifices. At the time, he made a whip of cords that he used to chase them. So, as we discussed in the last 2 meditations, that those that are instructing the youth, teachers, parents, catechists, need to have zeal and energy for doing that. And he says one of the effects of having this kind of energy, desire for their salvation, is that when we see them commit a fault, we need to correct them. We need to guide their path back to God. He says this is part of Jesus' own ministry as well. Jesus, in his zeal for God, also had to correct individuals. He uses the example of those that were using his temple as a marketplace. He is going to correct them. We see his a flare in his temper, as for those adults, he needed to correct them. Father La Salle continues with another example that Jesus has. Jesus acted similarly toward the Pharisees because he could not tolerate their hypocrisy, false piety, and much less their pride, which led them to esteem and praise their own actions while belittling and blaming the behavior of others. He condemned all their conduct because they satisfied themselves with teaching others, but took no pains to practice what they taught. In all these encounters, Jesus Christ rebuked and blamed them publicly. See what Jesus Christ did not only to the Pharisees, but also on others on several occasions. So, Jesus, we see very often, maybe oftentimes harshly rebuking the Pharisees for their sinfulness, especially since they wouldn't recognize it. Now, obviously, we're not going to necessarily have that same kind of way in reproving our children, because they're not necessarily acting in a hypocritical way as the Pharisees were. But he gives us as an example that we ourselves, in following after our teacher, Jesus, and being a teacher, we also need to instruct by correcting and reproving our students. He continues with an example from St. Paul. St. Paul, with similar freedom, reproved the Corinthians for tolerating an incestuous person among them, telling them that they should have handed him over to the devil to be tormented in his body, so that his soul might be saved. So another example of St. Paul having to also correct those whom he has been sent to preach. So, you too must reprove and correct your disciples when they commit some fault. The more so because it is typical of children that they often make mistakes by doing many things without thinking. The reproofs and corrections give them time to reflect on what they have to do and cause them to watch over themselves in order not to be making the same mistakes. So, for children, he says specifically, especially if you're seeing them as your disciples, that you're also going to need to correct their faults. He says children very easily will make mistakes. They do things without thinking. They haven't developed fully their process of being able to think through things, especially when they're younger, and so they need that guidance to be able to know what is going to be good for them and what is not. And when they learn what is not going to be good, then they can grow to understand to not do those things again. Be exact then, not to allow considerable faults in them without providing this remedy for them. So this is one of the things our zeal for our children ought to have us do, is that when we see faults, sins, mistakes that they make, we want to correct them to be able to guide them on the proper path. God bless.